What is up, everybody? Mr. Percy here. Welcome to the Modern World, issues 2 and 3 on globalization and population increase. This is really stuff that most people are probably used to. And when I go over this stuff, you're going to be like, of course it's this way. But if you go back 50 years, a lot of this stuff that we're going to talk about today did not exist. So I want to kind of jump right into globalization and the definition of globalization. What it means is that today, in the modern world, there is an increased interdependence among the world and within certain regions. Simplify that and like on a basic level is countries are more interdependent with each other today than they have ever been in the world, in global history. So we have more interdependence between two countries, between multiple countries, where we rely on other countries economically, politically, socially, and they rely on us. So it's this constant interaction through a whole bunch of different things. And I want to go into a couple examples here of how globalization plays out. And the first one is economic globalization. So it's the idea that our economies are intertwined with other countries. And when I say we, I kind of mean the United States, but it would really fall into almost any other country in the world at this time. If you go back 150 years, this didn't exist. There was some globalization, but it was really pretty much limited between, for example, Britain and their colonies and some other places. Now we're really fully globalized. And a basic example of this is stop this right now, take a look at whatever shirt you're wearing and find out where it's from. My guess is it is not made in the United States. It is made in another country for maybe a US company, maybe a company somewhere else who has brought it into this country. And that's economic globalization. You buying that shirt supports those workers or that business in some other country, as well as wherever you bought the shirt here in the United States. So that's part of economic globalization. After World War II, and then especially in the past 20 or 30 years, there's been this increased regional economic globalization. So if you paid attention to the 2016 presidential election, this economic globalization organization, which is called the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, came up a lot in the debates. It was basically created in the 1990s to promote trade between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. So these three countries have free trade between them, meaning that if you bring goods in from Mexico to the United States, there is no tax on that good. So in the past, the United States would say, hey, Mexico, you produce things a lot cheaper than we do in the United States. We want to encourage American business. So when you bring your Mexican goods into the United States, we're going to put a tax on it to make it cost more. So that way people will buy American goods instead of buying the cheaper Mexican products. NAFTA says that Mexican goods can now come across the border in the United States and there will be no tax on it. And the same thing with Canada. The United States does benefit from this because, for example, our farm products can go into Mexico. For example, corn or potatoes can go into Mexico without having a tax on it. So it encourages people in Mexico to buy American goods as well. So this increases trade between the three. One of the criticisms of this is that it has led to a decrease in American jobs because a lot of factories have left what's called the Rust Belt up here and have moved those jobs to Mexico. So now Mexicans are working in factories that are that are run by American businesses because those goods can come back across the border without a tax on them. And that word tax, the official word is called a tariff, when you put a tax on a good coming from another country. Also, the European Union, same kind of idea. In Europe, these countries in blue are part of the European Union, although Britain has just voted to get out of it in 2016. And the European Union says that goods can flow across these borders. There is now one currency in these countries, and the currency is called the euro. Italy does not have its own currency anymore. They're all in the same on the same currency. So this is another example of how we're increasing interdependence between countries. Also, we have an organization called OPEC, which is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. These countries work together to control the supply and demand of oil. They decide how much oil, they decide together, and they're different countries, but they're deciding together, which is globalization, on how much oil to release into the market around the world. And if you control how much oil is put out into the market, you can help control the price. Now, these aren't the only countries producing oil and gas. There's other countries like the United States, we produce oil as well, but these countries here work together to try and control it. And the goal is for them to make as much money as possible. So sometimes they stop and hold back on the supply of oil, and therefore demand goes up and hopefully the price goes up. So that's OPEC. One last one, and this has popped up on the Regents recently. So in the past, this hasn't really been talked about too much. There's also international banking. There's ways to get, for example, there's something called the World Bank. And what this is the wealthiest countries pump money into the World Bank. And the World Bank then provides loans to developing or what used to be called third world countries, for example, countries in sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia. And those countries might need money to help build roads and infrastructure and help develop businesses. And the wealthiest countries put money into the World Bank. They loan out those monies to that money to the small countries, and then hope that it'll help end poverty and that prosperity will be shared. We also have something called the IMF, or the International Monetary Fund, and this also is designed to promote trade. These and cooperation between countries. These two organizations are just examples of how wealthier countries are providing money and helping provide funds for impoverished or poverty-stricken countries to help rebuild. So we don't have super poor countries and super rich countries. The goal is to kind of level the playing field to a certain degree. The countries that borrow this money, both from the IMF and the World Bank, do have to pay it back. There is interest on that money, meaning that they have to pay not just what they borrowed, but extra money on top of it. And sometimes they can't pay it back, which has become a problem over the past 20 years. That's the economic side. We also have political globalization. We have the United Nations, which is created after World War II. Remember, the League of Nations is weak. And with the totalitarians in between World War I and World War II, they're aggressive, and the League of Nations is a total failure. After World War II, at the end of when World War II officially ends, they create the United Nations. And the United Nations is the same concept as the League of Nations in its attempt to promote peace. If you ever go to New York City and you go down in the 40s, like the street, the 40s on First Avenue, you will see this building here. This is the United Nations. The United States government donated this land to the United Nations after World War II for meeting space. If the flags are up, if you ever go there and the flags are up, that means the United Nations is in session. If you go there and the flags are down, the United Nations isn't in session. There's 180 some or 190 some countries that are part of the United Nations. Almost every country in the world today is in the United Nations. And if you want to be part of the United Nations, you have to sign something called the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which basically promotes and guarantees human rights for all people. This is an example of a country, for example, Russia, who has signed the UN Declaration of Human Rights, is expected by the United Nations to follow and give freedom of speech and freedom of press. It's a lot of these Enlightenment ideas from way back in the day. So we have economic globalization, political globalization. We also have pop culture globalization. There's a lot of different ways, and we'll talk more about this in class. But one example is sports. So if you look here, these are all, and if you want to pause this and really take a good look if you're into sports, these are the most popular sports by country. So you have in green here is soccer, aka football, and most of the countries that used to be imperialized by the Europeans have soccer as their kind of national sport. You'll notice that we, the United States, our most popular sport is American football. We are one of the few countries around the world that actually has that as their main sport. We also have baseball, which is in yellow here. A lot of countries that have close ties to the United States have baseball as their most popular sport. You'll notice if you come over here, Japan is one of those countries. We helped rebuild Japan after World War II. And when our servicemen and women were over there, they helped promote baseball. And still to this day, baseball is extremely popular in Japan. So that's the popular culture. One kind of issue 3, just to wrap this up, is we also have population increases between 1950 and 2010, 2020. These are the estimates. So as of right now, the population estimates in the world are about 7 million or 7 billion people. If you went back to 1960, it was only 3 billion. So our population of the world has almost more than doubled in the past 60 or so years. It's estimated that by 2050, we'll be almost up to 10 billion people. So we have this huge increase in population. And one of the reasons that we see this increase in population is in the 1950s through the 1970s, the world went through something called the Green Revolution. And think of green like growing things, grass, flowers, springtime, whatever. And the world got their hands, and there was medical advances or scientific advances on how to use fertilizers better and how we can increase food production. And here's the key: with increase in food comes more people, because people who aren't starving are able and will have more children. The countries that it impacted, the countries that see this huge population growth, are not so much the United States, are countries like China and India and parts of Africa. And if you look here, this is where the Green Revolution develops. You're looking at China here, and if you come over, they're looking at about 500 million people in China in 1950. And today we're looking at 1.2 billion people. So over the course of 60 years, their population has more than doubled. Same thing in India. These two countries, China and India, are the two countries that are most affected by the Green Revolution. They're two of the most populous countries today. They make up almost 1/3 of the entire world population, which is insane. The question is, how do you react to this? Your population's increasing, and what do you do? And one place that actually did respond to this is China. They had the one child policy, which I'm sure most of you have heard about at some point. And the goal is how do we limit or slow down this growth? And essentially what they did is any family that has more than one child, you get fined, as opposed to the United States where you get tax breaks for each kid that you have. In China, it said if you have more kids than one kid, you get fined. Because China is such a patriarchal, male-dominated society, many poor families who had a girl first would give that girl up for adoption. So many adoption centers in China only have females, only have little girls up for adoption, because if you have a boy, it's seen as valuable. The boys take care of their parents when they get older, and girls go take care of their in-laws' parents. So a lot of females are going to be given up for adoption. Today, currently, they changed it. So in 2015, they changed the one-child policy. It is now a two-child policy because they were worried that the growth was slowing down too much. So that's what we got. Ton of stuff here. Globalization, increase in population. Hope you enjoyed it. As always, any questions, let me know. I'm out.